Sorry about the dog. He never does that. The Navy SEAL said as his canine suddenly lunged forward, pulling hard on the leash toward the waitress in the crowded restaurant. She took a step back, her eyes flickering with a momentary flash of something deep before returning to a mask of calm. "It's okay," she whispered, her hand tightening around the tray. The dog stopped dead in front of her and then unexpectedly sat down. No growling, no guarding. He was waiting for a command. The SEAL frowned. This K9 only did that for one person. Someone he believed was gone. Sophia Blake was 26 years old, but her eyes carried the weight of a century lived in the shadows. She worked at the Rusty Anchor, a busy, grease-stained diner on the edge of a coastal town known for its heavy military presence. To the locals and the regular sailors, Sophia was just a ghost in a faded blue apron. She was quiet, almost entirely silent, moving through the chaotic lunch rushes like a shadow against the peeling wallpaper. Sophia wasn't the kind of waitress who made small talk or flirted for better tips. She was the one who worked the double shifts that nobody else wanted, the ones that ended long after the moon had peaked. She was the one who took the difficult tables, the angry drunks, the grieving widows, or the demanding tourists who treated her like furniture. Her co-workers thought she was too cold or simply lacked a real personality. They didn't see the way her eyes never stopped scanning the room, measuring the distance to every exit, and noting the weight of every customer's stride. She lived a life of extreme, almost robotic discipline in a tiny one-room apartment above the diner. Every movement she made was economical, precise, and intentional. Sophia never argued. She never raised her voice, even when she was insulted. When a customer complained about a cold cup of coffee, she simply replaced it with a calm, vacant nod. She seemed content to be invisible, a small cog in a massive machine that didn't care to know her name or her history. But Sophia had secrets that were buried deeper than the cold Atlantic floor. She had a routine that involved checking the heavy deadbolts on her door exactly 3 times before sleeping. She had thick, jagged scars on her shoulders that she never showed to anyone, not even in the height of summer. And most importantly, she had a memory of a life she had tried to delete, a life filled with fire, barking, and the sound of helicopters in the night. One Tuesday afternoon, the heavy wooden door of the diner creaked open with a groan. In walked a man who radiated a quiet, terrifying authority. He was tall, built like a mountain of solid granite, with a face carved from years of exposure to harsh winds and harsher realities. He was dressed in civilian clothes, but anyone with eyes could see he was high-level military. Walking beside him on a short tactical lead was a Belgian Malinois, a high-drive military K9 that looked like a coiled spring of fur and muscle. The dog wore a professional tactical harness, and his eyes were like golden lasers, scanning the room for threats with a focus that no normal pet could ever possess. This was Ares, one of the most highly decorated and intelligent animals in the special operations community. The soldier was Daniel Hayes, a Navy SEAL on a rare week of administrative leave. Daniel looked for a quiet booth in the far corner, hoping for a peaceful meal away from the noise of the base. The restaurant was loud, filled with the cladding of silverware and the low hum of dozens of overlapping conversations. Sophia saw them enter from the corner of her eye, and for the first time in 3 years, her heart, usually a steady, frozen drum, skipped a single violent beat. She took a deep, shaky breath, adjusted her heavy tray, and forced herself to walk toward their table. She told herself she was just a waitress. She told herself the past stayed dead. As she approached within 5 feet, something happened that Daniel Hayes had never seen in all his years of working with Ares. The Nam, trained to ignore all distractions and stay focused solely on his handler, went completely rigid. His ears pinned back, and his nose twitched frantically as he caught a scent he thought had been lost to the wind. Suddenly, Ares lunged toward Sophia, not with aggression, but with a desperate need to get close to her. Daniel had to wrap the thick leash twice around his forearm to keep the dog from knocking her over. Sophia froze. For a split second, the waitress mask slipped, revealing a face of sharp, tactical awareness. Her posture changed instantly. Her feet moved into a subtle, balanced combat stance. Her thumb twitched in a very specific, rhythmic pattern against the polished side of the tray, a silent signal used by elite handlers. Ares immediately stopped pulling. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He sat perfectly still, his eyes locked on Sophia's face with a look of absolute soul-deep devotion. Daniel stared in pure disbelief. He looked at his dog, then up at the girl in the cheap apron. "Sorry about the dog," Daniel muttered, his voice full of suspicion as he tried to regain his breath. He's usually a complete professional. He never reacts to strangers. Sophia's voice was barely a whisper, her eyes avoiding Daniel's sharp gaze. "It's fine, he's a beautiful dog. He just looks tired." But Daniel noticed the detail. Sophia wasn't looking at the dog's fur or his friendly face. She was looking at the muck's harness, specifically at the weathered serial number etched into the heavy brass buckle. She knew exactly what kind of animal was sitting in front of her. She knew the weight of that harness. And Aries knew exactly who was serving the coffee. The ghost had been found. If you feel that the best heroes are often the ones the world ignores, type unfair. Daniel Hayes was a man trained by the finest instructors in the world to notice anomalies. And Sophia Blake was the biggest, most glaring anomaly he had ever encountered in civilian life. He watched her as she walked away to grab their menus, her back straight and her head moving in a constant, subtle scan. The way she moved, the specific weight distribution of her steps, the way she checked her 6 before turning a corner. It was all too familiar to him. Daniel had spent over 10 years in the SEAL teams. He knew the difference between a civilian and someone who had been through the grinder of special operations training. He looked down at Aries, who was still sitting in a perfect military heel. Aries wasn't looking at the kitchen or the plates of food passing by. He was watching Sophia's every move with a focus that was almost painful to witness. Aries had a dark and legendary history. He had been through 3 brutal deployments in the Middle East. He had lost his original handler in a high-intensity extraction mission 3 years ago. That handler was supposed to be a legend, a woman known as the Shadow who could talk to dogs like they were human extensions of her own soul. The official report said she had been caught in a catastrophic explosion and was presumed dead. Her body never recovered from the rubble. Daniel had inherited Aries after that, but the bond had remained distant, never truly bonding with another human being. Until now. Daniel tried to act natural when Sophia returned with the water. "You seem remarkably comfortable around high-drive working dogs," Daniel said, his voice testing the air like a sonar ping. Sophia didn't look up as she poured the water with a steady hand. "I grew up on a large farm. We had plenty of working dogs to keep the livestock in line." "Not like this one," Daniel countered, his eyes narrowing. "This is a specialized K9. He doesn't usually like strangers, and he certainly doesn't sit for them without a vocal command." Sophia offered a small, practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Maybe he just likes the smell of the bacon from the kitchen. It's hard for any dog to resist." She turned to leave, but Aries did something even more shocking. He reached out with a heavy paw and gently tapped Sophia's leg. In the world of high-level K9 training, that was the specific signal for alert or target identified. Sophia's hand shook for a fraction of a second, causing a single drop of water to spill onto the table. Daniel's suspicion was rapidly turning into a cold, hard certainty. He was about to ask another, more direct question, but he was interrupted by a sudden commotion near the bar. A group of rowdy men, clearly looking for trouble after a long day of drinking, were harassing the younger hostess. The leader was a massive man, fueled by cheap whiskey and a very bad attitude. He was shouting, causing the other customers to look away in fear, praying they wouldn't be the next target. The manager of the diner tried to step in and de-escalate the situation, but the big man shoved him back against the counter easily. The atmosphere in the room turned toxic and dangerous in an instant. Daniel began to stand up, his combat instincts taking over. He was ready to end the situation quickly, violently, and efficiently. But Sophia was faster. She didn't run. She didn't scream for help. She walked directly into the center of the conflict, holding a tray of dirty dishes like it was a shield. "Sir," she said, her voice low but carrying a strange, vibrating authority that seemed to cut through the man's drunken rage. "You're disturbing the other guests. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises immediately." The man laughed, looking down at the little waitress with a sneer. "And what exactly are you going to do about it, sweetheart? You going to throw a muffin at me?" He reached out with a thick hand to grab her arm, but Sophia moved with a speed that the human eye could barely follow in the dim light of the diner. She didn't strike him with a fist. She used a simple, elegant joint lock, using his own forward momentum against him. In one fluid, terrifyingly professional motion, the giant man was forced to his knees on the floor, his arm pinned painfully behind his back. She wasn't using brute strength. She was using high-level tactical combatives. The other men in the group froze, paralyzed and confused by how their leader was suddenly neutralized by a girl half his size. Sophia leaned in and whispered something into the man's ear, something short and sharp. Whatever she said made the man's face turn a sickly shade of pale. She released him and pointed toward the door with a steady finger. The men didn't argue. They didn't even look back. They grabbed their coats and scrambled out of the diner like frightened children. The entire restaurant fell into a stunned silence. Sophia simply picked up her tray, wiped a smudge off her apron, and went back to her station as if she had just cleared a table. But Daniel Hayes had seen everything. He had seen the Krav Maga technique. He had seen the way she controlled the room's perimeter with her eyes while the man was down. He looked at Aries. The dog's tail gave a single, happy, knowing thump against the floor. Daniel realized he wasn't looking at a waitress who knew about farms. He was looking at a ghost who had come back from the grave to serve coffee. The mystery of Sophia Blake was about to explode into a reality he wasn't prepared for. If you ever thought someone was ordinary, only to find out they were extraordinary. Type, I was wrong. The dinner rush finally ended, but the tension in Daniel's chest only grew heavier. He waited in the parking lot until Sophia's shift was officially over. He watched her walk out the back service door into the dark, narrow alleyway behind the diner. Daniel followed at a safe distance, with Aries leading the way with a purposeful, silent pull on the leash. As they rounded the corner into the shadows, Sophia was already waiting for them. She was leaning against a damp brick wall, her arms crossed over her chest, looking perfectly at home in the darkness. She wasn't holding a tray or wearing an apron anymore. She looked like a predator in her own right, her eyes sharp and cold. "You shouldn't have followed me, Daniel," she said, her voice finally dropping the soft waitress act and taking on the rasp of a soldier. "You shouldn't be alive, Sophia," Daniel replied, stepping into the dim amber light of a flickering street lamp. "The classified records say Specialist Sophia Blake was killed in action during Operation Nightfall. They even had a ceremony for you." "The records are wrong about a lot of things," she said coldly, her eyes scanning the rooftops above them. Daniel stepped closer, but Aries broke free from his grip. The dog ran to Sophia, jumping up and whining with a frantic joy that Daniel had never seen in 3 long years. Sophia dropped her guard completely. She knelt down in the dirt of the alley and buried her face in the dog's thick neck. "Hey, boy," she whispered, her voice finally breaking. "I missed you too. I'm so sorry I left you." Daniel felt a heavy lump in his throat. "Why, Sophia? Why did you disappear? Your team, they mourned you for months. Aries almost had to be put down because he stopped eating. He was waiting for you to come through the door." Sophia stood up, her face hardening again into a mask of stone. "The mission wasn't just a failure, Daniel. It was compromised from the inside. I didn't just disappear. I was left behind as a distraction." Twist 1, the betrayal. Sophia revealed that during the mission, a high-ranking officer in the command center had leaked their exact coordinates to the enemy. Her team had been wiped out in seconds. She had been blown into a deep ravine by an RPG and had crawled for 3 days through enemy territory to survive. When she finally made it to a secret safe house, she realized that if she returned, the people who betrayed her would simply finish the job to keep her quiet. She chose to stay dead to protect the only family she had left. But there was a second twist that Daniel didn't see coming. One that made his blood run cold. "Aries wasn't just my dog, Daniel," Sophia said, looking him directly in the eye. "He was the only silent witness. He has a microchip with encrypted thermal data stored in a hidden compartment in his tactical collar. On the data that proves exactly who gave the order to fire on our position." Daniel reached for Aries' collar, but Sophia stopped him with a firm hand. "Not here. They've been tracking Aries for years, hoping he would lead them to me. That's why you were sent to this specific town for your leave, wasn't it?" Your CO suggested this diner. Daniel froze. He realized with its yet a jolt of horror that his vacation hadn't been a coincidence at all. He had been used as a bloodhound without even knowing it. Suddenly, the sound of screeching tires echoed at both ends of the alley. Two black SUVs with tinted windows pulled in, blocking both exits. Men in tactical gear, but without any official military insignia, jumped out with suppressed rifles raised. They weren't there to arrest anyone. They were there to erase the last of the evidence. Daniel drew his sidearm, but he was outnumbered 10-1 in a narrow kill box. "Get behind the dumpster," Daniel shouted to Sophia, but Sophia didn't hide. She let out a sharp, piercing whistle, a frequency Ares knew by heart. Ares didn't wait for a command from Daniel. The dog launched into the air, a blur of fur and teeth, targeting the lead gunman with terrifying precision. Sophia moved like a whirlwind of lethal intent. She grabbed a heavy metal pipe from a nearby construction bin and engaged the closest attacker. Her movements were a terrifyingly beautiful display of Spec Ops training and raw survival instinct. She took down 3 men before they could even level their weapons at her. Daniel fired, providing suppressive cover as they moved toward his reinforced truck. The coordination between Sophia and Ares was flawless, like they were 2 parts of the same soul. Moving in a deadly dance they had practiced 1,000 times. They fought their way through the first wave of attackers, and Daniel realized he wasn't protecting a waitress. He was fighting alongside a living legend. As they scrambled into the truck and sped away into the night, Sophia looked back at the burning SUVs in the rearview mirror. "It's over now," Daniel said, his breath heavy with adrenaline. "No," Sophia replied, looking at the dog in the back seat, who was finally resting his head on her lap. "It's just beginning. We have the proof. Now we have to make sure the right people see it before they find us again." Daniel looked at the waitress sitting in his passenger seat. He realized that everyone who had ever looked down on her at the diner, everyone who had treated her like she was nothing, was a fool. The most dangerous person in the state had been serving them eggs and bacon for 3 years. And she was finally ready to stop serving and start leading the hunt. If you have ever owed a debt to someone who risked everything in silence, type, "I am indebted." They didn't go to a local police station, and they certainly didn't go back to the military base. Sophia led Daniel to a hidden, reinforced bunker she had prepared over the last 3 years, located deep in the coastal woods and disguised as a derelict hunting cabin. Inside, the walls weren't covered in wallpaper, but in maps, surveillance photos, and high-end digital equipment. Sophia spent the next few hours with her hands flying over a keyboard, extracting the encrypted data from Ares' specialized collar. As the files began to scroll across the green screen, Daniel's blood ran cold. The names on the list weren't enemies from across the ocean. They were people he had saluted every morning. People who had stood at the symbolic funerals of the men Sophia had lost. "You've been living like this for 3 years?" Daniel asked, looking around the cold, sterile room. "I did what I had to do to survive," Sophia said, her eyes fixed on the progress bar of the data upload. "I wasn't going to let them win. I just needed the right moment and the right witness to strike back." Daniel looked at her hands. For the first time since they met, they were finally still. He realized the waitress persona wasn't just a clever disguise. It was a self-imposed cage. She had been trapping all her rage, her grief, and her brilliance behind a mask of menial service, waiting for a spark. "Why didn't you come to me or to the other teams?" Sophia finally looked at him, her gaze softening for the first time that night. "I didn't know who I could trust, Daniel. Not after seeing my own commander sell us out. But then I saw you with Ares. I saw the way you treated a dog that wasn't yours. A man who takes care of a broken, grieving dog is a man who still has a soul worth trusting." The next morning, they made their move with the precision of a surgical strike. Using the data Sophia had recovered, Daniel contacted the only person he knew was absolutely clean, a retired admiral with a reputation for integrity and nothing left to lose. By noon, the military, police, and federal agents were mobilized. The traitors, the men who had profited from the deaths of Sophia's team, were arrested in a massive, coordinated sweep across 3 different states. The news of Sophia Blake's resurrection began to leak through the ranks like a wildfire. The ghost of Operation Nightfall was back, and she brought justice with her. But Sophia didn't want a parade. She didn't want her picture on the evening news or a medal pinned to her chest in front of a crowd. She stood in the Admiral's private office, wearing her old, dusty uniform for the first time in years, feeling the weight of the fabric. Daniel stood beside her, his heart full of a respect he couldn't put into words. "You're a hero, Sophia," the Admiral said, his voice thick with genuine emotion. "We owe you a debt we can never truly repay. You're being officially reinstated with full honors and back pay." Sophia looked at the medals sitting on the desk, then down at Ares, who was sitting contentedly at her feet. "I didn't do it for the honors, sir," she said quietly. "I did it for my team, and I did it for him. He deserved to have his handler back." Daniel walked her out of the building. The sun was bright, and for the first time, the salt air didn't smell like decay and secrets. It felt light. The crushing weight she had been carrying for 3 years was finally gone. "So, what now?" Daniel asked, leaning against his truck. "Back to the diner for the breakfast shift?" Sophia laughed, a real, genuine, and beautiful sound that made Daniel smile. "I think I'm officially done with serving coffee and taking insults, Daniel. I think it's time I started training the next generation of handlers. Ares and I have a lot of knowledge to pass on." "And Ares?" Daniel asked, though he already knew the answer. Sophia looked down at the dog. Ares looked up at her, his eyes bright and full of a life that had been missing for years. "He's staying exactly where he belongs. We've got a lot of lost time to make up for. If you believe that the strongest people are the ones who have survived the most, type, I will live well." 6 months later, a brand new, state-of-the-art training facility opened at the Special Warfare Center. It wasn't named after a politician or a general. It was named after the team Sophia had lost in the valley. Sophia was the lead instructor, her name now a whispered legend among the K-9 community and special forces alike. Daniel often visited the facility on his days off. He would stand by the fence and watch her work with the young sailors in their new den. She was tough, demanding, and brilliant, but she was no longer a ghost. She was a mentor. She was a leader. She was finally living in the light. One evening, after the last class of the day had finished, Daniel and Sophia sat on the grass of the training field. Ares was running in the distance, chasing a ball with the wild, unbridled energy of a puppy who had forgotten his scars. "Do you ever miss it?" Daniel asked quietly. "The quiet life? Being invisible?" Sophia shook her head, watching the sunset reflect off the water. "No, I realize that peace isn't about being invisible or hiding from the world. It's about being exactly who you were meant to be, regardless of the pasitas. I spent 3 years hiding because Yertu was afraid of the dark. I forgot that I was the one who was trained to hunt in it." Daniel looked at her, realizing how much his own life had changed because of that chance encounter at a greasy diner. He had learned that the people we often dismiss, the waitresses, the janitors, the quiet strangers in the corner, often carry the greatest and most heroic stories of all. He had learned that true strength doesn't need to shout to be felt. "You didn't just save Ares and the data, Sophia," Daniel said softly. "You saved me too. You reminded me why we do what we do. You reminded me that honor isn't about following orders. It's about doing what's right when the orders are wrong." Sophia smiled, a real smile this time, and leaned her head on his shoulder. The general public would never know the full, gritty story of what happened in that dark alleyway. They would never know that a simple waitress had brought down a massive conspiracy of powerful men. But in the shadows where real heroes live, Sophia Blake's name would be whispered with a reverence usually reserved for the gods of war. The story of the seal, the waitress, and the dog had come to an end, but the legacy of their courage would live on in every handler she trained and every life Ares would go on to save. Sophia was no longer serving tables. She was serving a higher purpose, and for the first time in her life, she was finally home. Lesson of the story: never judge a person by their current position, their tired eyes, or their modest appearance. The person serving your coffee might have saved the world yesterday, and the person you ignore today might be the one you need to save you tomorrow. Character is what you do when you think no one is watching. But remember, someone or something is always watching. Respect is earned through silent action, not through a loud title on a nameplate. If you believe that real strength is found in those who choose to be humble and stay true to their mission, comment, respect, and don't forget to subscribe to Essen Touching Stories for more powerful, true, and inspiring stories about the heroes among us who choose the shadows over the spotlight. Thank you for watching, and stay vigilant.